I want to speak directly to you about a phenomenon that is universally human. And honestly, it's incredibly exhausting.
Yeah, and it's almost entirely invisible to everyone else, right?
Exactly. I mean, imagine walking through your regular routine carrying this relentless, invisible prosecutor in your mind.
Like an inner judge.
Right, an inner judge, one that observes your choices, scrutinizes your missteps, and sometimes even cross-examines your completely harmless desires.
Just consistently issuing a verdict of guilty no matter what you do.
Yes. You try to be a conscientious person, you try to do the right thing, but no matter how diligently you work, this internal voice insists that you are falling short
That you're inherently flawed.
and fundamentally deserving of condemnation. We are drawing our core insights for this exploration primarily from Bertrand Russell's classic philosophical framework.
Specifically, his work called The Conquest of Happiness.
Right, and we are closely examining episode 7 of his work, titled The Sense of Sin. We're also bringing in classical Stoic texts and current research outlining the neurobiology of shame.
But before we begin dismantling that psychological architecture, we must establish firm boundaries for our conversation.
Good point.
We are engaging in practical philosophy intended for your regular routine. The insights we are analyzing are meant to help you critically reflect on your own cognitive patterns.
So, no medical advice here.
Exactly. We are not offering medical advice, and this discussion is not a substitute for therapy. We cannot promise specific psychological outcomes or guarantee that your underlying anxieties will vanish.
But examining these philosophical constructs can help you understand your own mind.
And it may support a more peaceful, balanced mindset as you navigate your obligations.
If this episode helps you, please hit like and subscribe for the next one.
Our mission in this discussion is to rationally and systematically dismantle that irrational inner prosecution. We want to help you transition from a state of paralyzing self-condemnation to a dignified state of active repair. Overlay text, practical philosophy for your regular routine.
So, let us break down this concept of the sense of sin, because Russell's vocabulary can sound a bit steeped in older moralism.
Right. When he uses that phrase, he is not necessarily talking about grand, objective ethical violations.
No, he's describing a chronic, low-grade fever of guilt.
It is a bizarre inner prosecution where you feel perpetually divided against yourself.
You carry this rigid, idealized avatar of how flawless you ought to be.
And then you have the messy reality of your actual human behavior.
And the friction between those two states causes, well, immense suffering.
Immense suffering. And the origin of that friction is what merits real scrutiny. Russell makes a brilliant observation here.
What's that?
For the vast majority of people, this chronic self-condemnation entirely survives beyond any rational moral purpose.
It outlives real conscience.
Exactly. It often stems from unexamined taboos or what he terms infantile suggestions.
Meaning things we picked up during early upbringing.
Yes, when we are very young, our primary caregivers instill behavioral rules to keep us safe and to socialize us.
But a developing mind lacks nuance.
Right. It interprets these rules as absolute, terrifying laws of survival.
And if we do not actively audit these rules with mature rationality, we end up carrying a toddler's rigid, unforgiving morality into our complex adult lives.
We demand an impossible perfection from ourselves based on a rulebook written when we were barely able to speak.
But hold on, if we completely discard those foundational rules, aren't we risking a sort of moral apathy?
That is the common fear, yes.
I mean, the inner judge, as brutal as it is, feels like it is keeping us in check. If I silence it, my immediate fear is that I will just become selfish.
But that fear is exactly how the inner judge maintained its jurisdiction.
How so?
It convinces you that without its constant abuse, you would be a monster. But the reality is the exact opposite.
Russell points out that this constant fear of being inherently bad actually diminishes your capacity for genuine goodness.
Precisely. When you feel constantly inferior and condemned by your own mind, it breeds resentment and envy toward others.
You begin to assume everyone else is living these frictionless, morally pure lives.
Which triggers deep social isolation. You pull away from your community because you feel fraudulent and unworthy of connection. Overlay text. Inner prosecution exhausts your natural zest.
So the mechanism we rely on to make ourselves good is actually stripping away our vitality.
It isolates us, yes.
That naturally leads us to a critical distinction. We have to separate a healthy conscience from this toxic condemnation.
Because the inner judge loves to masquerade as your conscience.
They are fundamentally different mechanisms, though, right? Both philosophically and neurobiologically.
Think of a true, healthy conscience as a navigational compass.
A compass is objective and emotionally neutral.
It simply shows you your current coordinates relative to your chosen destination.
If you veer off your moral path, a healthy conscience assesses the action.
It highlights the precise error and provides clear, actionable direction for the course correction.
It basically communicates, an error occurred, here is the required adjustment.
Whereas condemnation functions like an anchor.
It does not offer navigation.
No, it completely paralyzes you. It relies on the incredibly heavy emotion of shame.
When you are steeped in self-condemnation, you are not receiving directions for how to improve.
You're being frozen in place. Shame attacks the core identity.
It drops this massive weight on you, ensuring you cannot take the necessary steps to actually repair the damage. Overlay text. Conscience is a compass, not an anchor.
Current psychology reinforces this exact philosophical split. Researchers differentiate between guilt and shame by looking at how the brain processes information.
Healthy guilt is categorized as valuable information.
It is a signal stating, I did something harmful.
And that is a highly functional pro-social signal.
Condemnation, however, weaponizes that signal. It turns guilt into an identity.
It morphs the phrase, I did something harmful, into, I am inherently harmful.
It takes a localized action and metastasizes it into a permanent character trait.
If the psychological and philosophical consensus is that this inner prosecution is so destructive, why do we clutch it so tightly?
That is the big question. We clearly hate the feeling, yet we sustain it.
Habit seems like the most obvious culprit.
Absolutely. We maintain the anxieties instilled by our early environments simply because we have never applied our adult intellect to challenge the jurisdiction of that internal court.
Habit is the baseline, but the fear of judgment is the accelerant.
Human beings are profoundly social creatures, wired for group cohesion.
The fear of public opinion, the terror of becoming an outcast from the herd, is deeply embedded in our evolutionary psychology.
We subconsciously believe that by preemptively punishing ourselves, we might spare ourselves the wrath of the community.
It is a twisted form of social appeasement.
We essentially think, if I beat myself up relentlessly, the tribe will see my suffering and decide not to exile me.
That plays directly into perfection thinking.
There is this pervasive, irrational belief that one must live a completely flawless life to justify their existence,
We set an impossible standard of absolute purity.
which mathematically guarantees a permanent feeling of failure.
It is a rigged game where the only outcome is self-loathing.
I would argue the most insidious reason it persists is our desperate need for control.
Using guilt to feel in control.
Yes, we use guilt to generate a false illusion of moral management.
Because acknowledging that we are flawed, vulnerable, and capable of making unfixable mistakes is terrifying.
Wallowing in self-punishment tricks the mind into thinking it is taking responsibility.
The agonizing rumination feels like active problem solving.
But it is actually a defense mechanism against our own fallibility.
We substitute the difficult, humbling work of real repair with the purely internal drama of self-flagellation. Overlay text. Perfection thinking guarantees a feeling of failure.
We need to pause here and set up some guardrails, though.
I absolutely agree. I want to push back on this slightly, just to be safe.
Right, because this can be misinterpreted.
When we talk about dismantling shame and rejecting this inner prosecution, someone listening might interpret this as a philosophical permission slip to act ruthlessly.
The thought is, if I drop my guilt, what stops me from causing harm and simply walking away unbothered?
Exactly. So this is absolutely not permission to harm others.
Discarding irrational guilt is not a license for lawlessness or malice. Accountability matters tremendously.
Accountability requires the psychological fortitude to view reality clearly.
You cannot own a mistake if you're too fragile to look at it.
Practicing self-compassion does not mean lowering your moral standards.
It creates the psychological safety necessary to look at your failures without flinching.
If admitting an error means you are a worthless monster, your ego will deploy massive defensive walls.
You will deny, deflect, and blame everyone else.
Self-compassion allows you to say, I caused harm, I remain a human being of inherent worth, and therefore I have the strength to fix this.
Classical wisdom traditions have understood this dynamic for a very long period.
If you look at concepts focused on returning to the right path, the emphasis is entirely on the active return.
It requires rigorous, honest reflection, but it culminates in behavioral change and concrete amends.
Sitting alone in a dark room hating yourself carries zero moral weight.
It is practically useless to the people you have negatively impacted. The active repair is where the morality lives. Overlay text. Repair is stronger than remaining shame.
Classical Stoic philosophy approaches this through the vital concept of humility.
When we viciously attack ourselves for making a misstep, we are actually indulging in a bizarre form of arrogance.
We are raging against the universe because we harbored a secret belief that we were supposed to be godlike and infallible.
True humility means accepting your fundamental human imperfection.
When you fail, the Stoic imperative is to return to your baseline with dignity.
You acknowledge the misstep, you implement the correction, and you resume your responsibilities without demanding an audience for your self-indulgent misery.
Let us map out the actual exit path from this cycle.
The very first tactical step is to replace vague guilt with specific responsibility.
Vague guilt is a dense, suffocating fog.
It simply broadcasts a generalized message of unworthiness.
You have to pierce that fog by swapping out the cloudy emotion for a highly specific, actionable fact. Overlay text. Replace vague guilt with specific, clear responsibility.
Once you isolate the specific objective fact of the error, the mandate becomes clear.
Repair what you can and consciously release what you cannot.
This is the core of the Stoic dichotomy of control.
If you break a physical object, you sweep up the pieces and provide a replacement. That is the necessary repair.
However, you cannot reverse the laws of physics to unbreak the object.
You must consciously release the emotional baggage of the event because it now resides entirely outside your sphere of influence.
Your agency exists solely in the action of repair.
To maintain that clarity, you have to establish an honest and humane standard for your own conduct.
You have to draft a rational code that recognizes that miscalculations, ignorance, and blunders are an inherent part of the shared human condition.
You would never look at a close friend and demand a life completely devoid of errors.
So applying that inhumane standard to your own psyche is absurd.
It ultimately requires a massive paradigm shift.
Learning how to do good without relying on self-hatred as your engine?
Many individuals are secretly terrified that their morality is entirely dependent on their self-loathing.
They believe that without the inner judge holding a whip, they will devolve into terrible people.
But it is entirely possible to be a deeply moral, highly responsible person driven by a desire for communal harmony,
A love for your values and a genuine respect for others.
rather than being driven by the exhausting neurotic fear of inner punishment.
Let us pull this out of the philosophical clouds and look at how this ruins a regular routine.
Let us examine 3 specific examples: work, relationships, and personal habits.
Consider a standard professional scenario.
You make a significant mistake on a major project. A critical calculation was wrong, or a vital detail was overlooked.
Instantly, the inner judge steps in, and a localized error spirals into a catastrophic identity crisis.
The internal narrative rapidly shifts from, "I made a calculation error," to, "I am thoroughly incompetent, my career is a sham, and I deserve to be terminated."
The exit path in that professional scenario requires immediately short-circuiting the identity crisis.
You must aggressively pull your cognitive focus away from your ego and place it squarely onto the mechanical task.
You simply correct the specific error.
You communicate transparently with your colleagues regarding the oversight and the implemented solution.
Once that practical repair is in motion, you deliberately return to a state of calm focus.
You categorically refuse to entertain the dramatic fiction regarding your ultimate worth as an employee. Overlay text. Return to your baseline with calm focus.
Moving to the next scenario, relationships.
You engage in a heated dispute with a partner or a friend, and you lose your temper.
You utter something uncharitable and sharp. The moment the anger subsides, the regret sets in.
But instead of letting that regret act as a simple compass needle pointing toward an apology, it morphs into agonizing drama.
You might withdraw completely, deploying the silent treatment out of your own shame.
Or worse, you engage in a tearful, performative session of self-punishment, where you inadvertently force the person you hurt to comfort you.
That performative suffering is incredibly common and deeply manipulative, even if it is unintentional.
The exit path for relational friction is to strip away the theatrical drama.
You offer a direct, unequivocal apology for this specific remark.
You take full ownership of your side of the friction, and you ask directly how you can repair the bond.
Crucially, you do this without layering on heavy, demanding self-flagellation.
You handle the interpersonal mistake with adult dignity, keeping the focus entirely on the other person's feelings rather than centering your own emotional distress.
The final scenario revolves around habits.
You establish a goal to maintain a specific routine, perhaps exercising consistently or disengaging from screens before rest.
You maintain the discipline for a short period, and then you break the streak.
Immediately, the inner judge broadcasts the absolute defeatist story.
I always fail. I lack fundamental discipline. I'm inherently lazy, so there's no point in continuing.
This is exactly where perfection thinking destroys compounding progress.
The exit path is to utterly reject that catastrophic, absolute statement.
You missed a single localized target.
You acknowledge the lapse objectively. You briefly investigate the variables that caused it without attaching moral judgment.
And then you return to your baseline with one clean, positive step.
You resume the intended rhythm without demanding a penalty.
You want to equip you with a concrete framework to handle these moments. We call this the conscience reset.
This is a guided sequential exercise designed to neutralize the inner judge the moment it initiates an attack.
The very first step is entirely physiological. When shame hits the nervous system, we physically brace for impact.
So the moment you feel the spike of guilt, pause and actively soften your body.
Drop your shoulders, unclench your jaw, and regulate your breathing.
Once the nervous system is slightly regulated, the next step is cognitive isolation. Name the specific guilt story in one single sentence.
Do not allow it to remain a swirling, amorphous cloud of anxiety in your mind. Pin it down with language.
State clearly to yourself, I'm experiencing guilt because I missed that specific deadline.
Then you must forcefully separate that single sentence into two distinct parts.
Part 1 encompasses exactly what you did, the pure, objective facts recorded by reality.
I submitted the project late.
Part 2 encompasses what it means, the subjective, highly emotional story your inner judge is aggressively attaching to the facts.
This means I am unreliable and a failure.
You must force yourself to observe the massive chasm between the factual event and the fabricated emotional meaning.
Having separated the facts from the fiction, choose one specific responsibility you can take immediately.
Direct all of your cognitive energy exclusively toward the variables currently within your control.
This deliberate narrowing of focus completely cuts through the overwhelming, paralyzing feeling of helplessness that shame thrives on.
Following that, choose one precise repair action.
This is the outward movement. It could be delivering a direct apology to the affected individual.
Or clarifying a misunderstanding, correcting the flawed document, or making amends in another highly tangible manner.
Action is the ultimate antidote to the despair generated by the inner judge.
Immediately after you decide on your repair action, you must establish a psychological boundary using a release statement.
You say to yourself with total clarity, I repair, I do not punish myself. Overlay text, I repair, I do not punish myself.
This functions as a declaration of your core values.
You are affirming your commitment to strict accountability while simultaneously rejecting the useless abuse of the inner judge.
To finalize the reset, commit to one proof action immediately.
Prove to your own nervous system that you are moving forward by executing one small, unequivocally positive task that aligns with your chosen values.
This closes the psychological loop, restores your forward momentum, and leaves the inner judge without any leverage.
As you begin implementing this framework in your life, you will inevitably encounter friction.
We need to explicitly outline the typical mistakes people make during this process and provide their immediate fixes.
First, there is the persistent mistake of believing that internal self-punishment equals external accountability.
We have dissected this, but the illusion is incredibly stubborn. When you sit in isolation and verbally abuse yourself, you're providing zero benefit to the situation.
The fix is to consciously and forcefully shift your energetic output from inward attack to outward repair. Constantly ask yourself, is this rumination serving my ego or is it serving the situation?
Next, a major mistake is continuing to grant authority to outdated early taboos.
Your mind might be flashing red alerts, screaming that you have committed an atrocity simply because you violated a rigid rule that was designed for a small child.
The fix is to hold that feeling of remorse up to the harsh light of your mature adult reason. Interrogate the rule.
If the underlying premise is absurd or no longer applicable to your adult context, you must categorically discard it.
Another frequent mistake is attempting to leverage shame as your primary motivational tool.
People harbor this dark theory that if they just hate their flaws intensely enough, they will eventually scare themselves into transformation.
The neurobiology of motivation proves this is entirely false. Shame degrades the executive functioning required for sustained change.
The fix is to allow the objective information of guilt to guide your behavioral adjustment, but actively refuse shame's invasive attack on your fundamental identity.
You can absolutely change your trajectory based on a profound sense of self-respect rather than relying on the corrosive fuel of self-loathing.
Furthermore, a devastating mistake is over-identifying with a single isolated error.
We take our worst moments, put them under a microscopic lens, and convince ourselves that this one failure permanently defines the totality of our existence.
The fix requires an immediate expansion of your perspective. You must step back and view the localized mistake against the vast, complex backdrop of your entire life.
You are a highly intricate mosaic constructed of thousands of choices, actions, and efforts. One cracked tile does not obliterate the value of the entire mosaic.
Finally, a profoundly common mistake is waiting to feel completely forgiven or emotionally light before changing your behavior.
We sit in a state of paralysis, hoping the heavy, oppressive feeling will magically dissipate so we can finally start taking the correct actions again.
The fix is to completely invert that logic. Change the behavior first.
Execute the positive step, initiate the concrete repair, and you will discover that the emotional feeling of restoration naturally and inevitably follows the outward action. Overlay text. Change the behavior to feel true restoration.
Let us synthesize all of this and recap the core philosophical and practical lessons we have explored.
First, the sense of sin is an irrational, archaic inner prosecution that actively exhausts our vitality and robs us of our capacity for joy.
Next, we must constantly differentiate our internal signals. A healthy conscience serves as an objective compass for guidance, whereas condemnation acts as a heavy anchor designed only to freeze us in place.
Additionally, while healthy guilt provides highly useful data regarding our missteps and value misalignments, it must never be permitted to metastasize into our core identity.
Also, we must recognize that we sustain this exhausting psychological dynamic out of unexamined habit, a deeply flawed pursuit of perfectionism, and a desperate desire for an illusion of control over our moral standing.
Then, we must firmly remember the guardrails discarding toxic shame is never permission to inflict harm. Rigorous accountability and genuine humility are essential, and practicing self-compassion is precisely what gives us the strength to be truly accountable.
Furthermore, the required path forward is to systematically replace vague, crushing guilt with highly specific, actionable repair, ensuring we evaluate our lives using standards that are rigorously honest and profoundly humane.
Finally, whenever we inevitably stumble amidst our professional duties, our interpersonal relationships, or our personal routines, we can deploy the conscience reset to assume real responsibility and resume our momentum without carrying the paralyzing burden of self-hatred. Overlay text. A healthy conscience guides rather than condemns.
This philosophical shift regarding the inner judge is incredibly powerful. However, neutralizing the judgment originating from within is only half the battle.
What happens when the intense scrutiny and condemnation aren't just an internal monologue, but feel like they are pressing in heavily from society at large?
In our upcoming exploration, we are going to confront another massive psychological barrier. We will be analyzing persecution mania and fear of public opinion, the social trap. You will definitely want to join us as we dismantle the mechanics of social paranoia and external judgment.
Thanks for being here. If you want the full series, check the playlist and please like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Support line 1 included verbatim. Pass. Support line 2 included verbatim. Pass. No timestamps or digits included. Pass. Total length matches target range. Pass.